My husband told me he was going to visit his mother. It sounded completely normal. His mother lived only a short drive away, and he had been checking on her more often lately. So I didn't question him. I trusted him. Until 8:43 that night, my phone rang. It was a woman I had never spoken to before. She introduced herself as my husband's mother's neighbor. Then she asked me something that made my entire body go cold. "Are you sure your husband is supposed to be here tonight?" I didn't understand. I told her yes. He had left hours earlier. He had told me exactly where he was going. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then she said, "I'm sorry, but your husband hasn't been here." I looked at the clock, then at the empty chair where he usually sat. For the first time that night, I realized I wasn't waiting for my husband to come home. I was waiting to find out where he really was. I called him. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. Then a message appeared on my phone. Just 5 words. "Don't ask my mother." And suddenly, the question wasn't simply where my husband had been. The question was, what had he been hiding from me? For years, I had learned not to question every little thing my husband did. Not because I didn't care, because I trusted him. We had built a life together around that trust. Shared bills, family dinners, weekend routines, quiet conversations before bed. He wasn't the kind of man who gave me reasons to worry. At least, that's what I believed. So when he told me he was going to visit his mother that evening, I didn't think twice. His mother had been having a difficult time lately. He said he wanted to check on her, make sure she had everything she needed, maybe fix something around the house. It sounded completely ordinary. He grabbed his jacket from the chair, picked up his keys, then kissed me goodbye. Before walking out the door, he turned around and said, "I'll probably be back late." I remember smiling. I remember telling him not to rush, and I remember watching his car disappear down the street. There was nothing suspicious about it, nothing that would make me question where he was going. That was the frightening part. The lie didn't look like a lie. It looked like an ordinary evening between 2 married people. A few hours passed. I made dinner for myself, watched television, checked my phone. Around 9 o'clock, I sent him a simple message. "How's your mom doing?" He replied almost immediately. "She's okay. I'm staying a little longer." I didn't think anything of it. Then another message came. "I'll explain when I get home." That sentence stayed in my mind for a moment. What explain? But I dismissed the thought. Maybe something had happened with his mother. Maybe she was upset. Maybe he simply didn't want to discuss it over text. I trusted him enough to let the question go. Until my phone rang. The number wasn't saved. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. A woman's voice came through the phone. She sounded hesitant, almost nervous. She asked if she was speaking to my husband's wife. I said yes. Then she told me her name. She was my husband's mother's neighbor. I had never met her. She said she was calling because she had seen my husband's car earlier that week. Then she asked, "Is he visiting your mother tonight?" I froze. I told her yes. There was another pause. Then she said something I wasn't prepared to hear. "That's strange, because I haven't seen him there tonight." I looked toward the clock, toward the empty driveway. Suddenly, the perfectly ordinary explanation my husband had given me didn't seem so perfect anymore. And for the first time in our marriage, I wondered if the person I trusted most had just lied directly to my face. But I still didn't know why, and I certainly wasn't prepared for what I would discover next. The woman's voice on the phone was calm, but there was something in the way she spoke that made me uneasy. She repeated the question, "Are you sure your husband is visiting his mother tonight?" I said yes. He had told me himself. He had left the house a few hours earlier. He even texted me saying he was still there. The woman went quiet. Then she said, "I think you should know something." My heart started beating faster. She explained that she lived directly across from my mother-in-law's house. She knew the family's cars. She knew when my husband usually visited. And that night, she hadn't seen him arrive. Not once. I tried to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he had parked somewhere else. Maybe he had stopped somewhere before going to his mother's house. Maybe the neighbor simply hadn't noticed him. I wanted one of those explanations to be true, because accepting the alternative meant accepting something much worse. I asked her when she had last seen him. She hesitated. Then she said, 3 days ago. 3 days. Not tonight. Not earlier that evening. 3 days ago. I looked at the message my husband had sent me. "She's okay. I'm staying a little longer." Suddenly, those words felt different. I asked the neighbor if she was absolutely certain. She said yes. Then she told me something else. Earlier that afternoon, she had seen a car parked near my mother-in-law's driveway, but it wasn't my husband's car. It belonged to someone she didn't recognize, and according to her, a woman had gotten out of that car. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to ask the next question, but I did. "Did you see my husband with her?" The neighbor didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "I don't know." That should have made me feel better. It didn't, because now there was a stranger, a strange car, a woman, and a husband who had told me he was somewhere he apparently wasn't. I called my husband. Once, no answer. Twice, still nothing. Then I sent him a message. "Where are you?" A minute passed, then 5, then 10. Finally, my phone buzzed. I opened the message expecting an explanation. Instead, there were only 5 words. "Don't ask my mother." I stared at the screen. I read it again and again. Why would he say that? Why would he specifically tell me not to ask my mother? Unless he knew I was about to. I picked up my phone. My mother-in-law's number was already on the screen. My finger hovered over the call button, and for the first time that night, I realized I wasn't afraid of what she might tell me. I was afraid she might already know. And whatever happened next was going to change the way I saw my husband. I didn't call my mother-in-law. Not yet. Something stopped me. Maybe fear, maybe instinct, or maybe I already knew that one phone call could change everything. Instead, I opened the message from my husband again. "Don't ask my mother." 5 words, but they raised 100 questions. Why was he warning me? How did he know I might contact her? And most importantly, what was he afraid I would discover? I started with the simplest thing. I checked the location history on our shared phone account. His phone had been somewhere that evening, but not near his mother's house. It had been several miles away. I stared at the screen. Then I checked the time. 8:17 p.m. That was exactly when he had told me he was sitting at his mother's house having coffee. He hadn't been there. He hadn't even been close. I called him again. This time, he answered. His voice sounded strangely calm. He said hello as if nothing was wrong. I asked him where he was. There was a pause. Then he said, "I told you, I'm with Mom." I didn't accuse him. I simply asked, "Are you sure?" Another silence, longer this time. Then he said he was tired and would explain everything when he came home. I asked him why his location showed somewhere else. He didn't answer. Instead, the call ended. I sat there staring at the phone. For the first time, I understood that I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with a lie. But I still didn't know how deep it went. The next morning, I drove to his mother's house. I didn't tell him. I needed to hear the truth from someone who had nothing to gain by protecting his story. His mother's house looked exactly as it always had. Quiet, ordinary, almost peaceful. I knocked on the door. His mother opened it. The moment she saw me, her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. I asked her a simple question. "Did my husband visit you last night?" She looked at me, then looked toward the hallway, and finally she whispered, "No." I felt the air leave my lungs. I asked her why my husband would tell me he was there. She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "What did he tell you?" That question frightened me more than anything else, because it meant she knew there was a story, and she knew her son had been hiding something. I showed her the message. She read it silently, then handed the phone back to me. Her eyes were full of sorrow. She said, "I was afraid this day would come." I asked her what she meant. She walked toward a cabinet in the living room. From inside, she took out an old envelope. She held it in her hands for several seconds. Then she looked at me and said, "There is something about my son you need to know." My heart sank, because suddenly the question wasn't where my husband had been that night. The question was how long he had been hiding the truth, and the envelope in her hands was about to give me the first real answer. My mother-in-law placed the envelope on the table. She didn't open it immediately. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "This isn't the first time I've had to protect my son." I looked at her. She continued. Years earlier, before our marriage, her son had been involved with someone from his past, a relationship he had never completely explained. She told me it ended badly, but she also told me there was something else, something he had never told me. The woman I had seen mentioned in the neighbor's story was connected to that past. My hands went cold. I asked her who the woman was. My mother-in-law hesitated. Then she gave me a name I had never heard before, but apparently my husband had. I asked why he would be seeing this woman now. She didn't know, or perhaps she didn't want to tell me. Then she finally opened the envelope. Inside was an old photograph. My husband was younger, standing beside the woman. They looked happy. On the back of the photograph was a date, 23 years earlier. I stared at the picture. Then I noticed something else. There was a handwritten note beneath the date. Only 4 words. "We were supposed to." I asked her what it meant. She looked away. Then she told me the part that hurt the most. Before I met my husband, that woman had been pregnant. The pregnancy had ended before the child was born. At least, that's what my husband had always told his family. But my mother-in-law wasn't sure that was the whole story. She said her son had spent years trying to forget that chapter. Then, about 6 months earlier, the woman had contacted him again. At first, he ignored her. Then the messages became more frequent. Eventually, he started meeting her, secretly. My heart sank. I asked the question I had been avoiding. Was he having an affair with her? My mother-in-law shook her head. I don't know. That answer somehow hurt more than a yes, because there was something else, something neither of them had told me. She pulled another piece of paper from the envelope. It was a copy of a letter. The letter had been written by the woman, and one sentence was underlined. You promised you would come when I found her. I read the sentence twice. Found her, not found it, not found out. Found her. I looked at my mother-in-law. She was crying now. I asked, who did she find? She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, that's what my son has been trying to hide. Suddenly, the story wasn't about another woman anymore. It wasn't even about an affair. There was another person involved, someone whose existence had been hidden from me. Someone who might have been connected to my husband's past and possibly to our family's future. I left the house with a copy of that letter in my hands. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about one sentence. You promised you would come when I found her. I had spent the entire night trying to discover where my husband had been. Now I had a much bigger question. Who had he been meeting? And who was the woman talking about? When my husband finally came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table. The envelope was in front of me. I didn't hide it. I wanted him to see it. I wanted to know whether he would finally tell me the truth or create another story. He walked through the door and stopped. The moment he saw the envelope, his expression changed. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, who is she? He didn't answer. I asked again, who is the woman you have been meeting? He put his keys on the table. His hands were shaking. Then he sat down, and for the first time that night, he stopped trying to explain. He told me the woman was someone from his past, someone he had loved before we met. They had separated decades ago after a painful decision. He thought that chapter of his life was finished until 6 months earlier she contacted him. But there was something he hadn't told me. She had discovered that the daughter she believed had been lost years ago was alive. My husband had been helping her find her. I couldn't speak. I looked at him and asked, "And you never thought I deserved to know?" He lowered his eyes. He said he was afraid that if he told me I would misunderstand, afraid I would think he had returned to his old relationship, afraid telling me about the daughter would destroy the life we had built together. But his silence had already done something. It had destroyed my trust. I asked him one final question. Were you having an affair with her? He looked directly at me and said, "No." Then he explained. He had met the woman several times. He had helped her search. He had kept the meeting secret, but there had been no romantic relationship. The secret was something else, a daughter he had believed was gone forever, a daughter he had never known was alive, and now she wanted to meet him. I felt anger, then sadness, then something I hadn't expected, compassion, because suddenly the lie had a completely different shape. It wasn't the lie I had imagined, but it was still a lie. He had made the decision for both of us. He had decided I couldn't handle the truth, and that was the part I couldn't forgive immediately. I told him, "You weren't protecting our marriage." He looked at me. I continued, "You were protecting yourself from the consequences of telling me." He had no answer. For the first time, the silence between us wasn't comfortable. It was honest. The next morning, he showed me the photograph. Then he showed me the messages, and finally, he showed me a recent picture of the woman he had been searching for. his daughter, a young woman who had spent most of her life wondering where her father was. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I realized something. This wasn't simply about a husband who lied. It was about three people whose lives had been shaped by a secret they never chose. A mother who lost her daughter, a father who never knew she was alive, and a daughter who had spent years searching for the truth. My husband had made a terrible choice by hiding it from me, but now the truth was finally out, and we had to decide what to do with it. Because sometimes discovering the truth doesn't tell you how to move forward. It only gives you the chance to choose what happens next.
Why do people lie to the people they love? At first glance, this story looks like it is about a husband who lied to his wife. But the deeper question is more complicated. Why do people sometimes hide the truth from the people they love most? The answer isn't always betrayal. Sometimes it's fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of being judged, fear of destroying the life they've built. And sometimes people convince themselves that a lie is actually a form of protection. When my husband told me he was visiting his mother, he created a simple story. But behind that story was something much bigger. He believed that telling me the truth would create pain, so he chose silence. This is one of the most complicated forms of dishonesty. A person may tell themselves, "I'm hiding this because I don't want to hurt them." But the problem is, they're making the decision for someone else. They're deciding what the other person deserves to know, and that can be just as damaging as the original secret. When people hear the word trust in a marriage, they often think about cheating, but trust is much bigger than that. Trust means, I believe you will tell me the truth, even when the truth is difficult. When that expectation disappears, the relationship changes. Even if the hidden truth wasn't romantic, even if there was no affair, even if the original intention was good, the secrecy itself can create damage, because the betrayed person begins asking, "What else don't I know?" The most dangerous part of a lie isn't always the lie itself. It's what happens afterwards. Once someone discovers one deception, their mind begins searching for patterns. Was this the first time? How long has it been happening? Who else knew? What else was hidden? This is why rebuilding trust can take much longer than breaking it. The truth may take one conversation, but trust can take years to rebuild. This story also teaches an important lesson. Good intentions do not automatically create good outcomes. My husband may have believed he was protecting his marriage, but his decision still caused pain. This is an important distinction in relationships. We can understand why someone made a choice without saying the choice was right. Understanding is not the same as excusing. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and love does not mean accepting every behavior without boundaries. There was another person at the center of this story, the daughter. She had spent years without knowing the complete truth about her own family. That is what makes family secrets so complicated. A secret rarely belongs to one person. Eventually, it can affect an entire generation. Children may grow up asking, "Why did nobody tell me?" And sometimes the truth they discover later changes how they understand their entire childhood. There is another lesson hidden inside this story. Time doesn't always make secrets disappear. Sometimes it makes them heavier. A secret hidden for 1 week may be manageable. A secret hidden for 10 years can change an entire family. And a secret hidden for decades may become part of someone's identity. That's why difficult conversations matter. Not because every truth is easy, but because people deserve the opportunity to make informed choices about their own lives. The lesson isn't never keep a secret.
Some secrets are private. Some information belongs to another person. Some situations require patience. The deeper lesson is this: don't confuse protecting someone with controlling what they are allowed to know. If the truth affects their marriage, their family, their future, or their ability to make important decisions, then hiding it may take away their choice. Real trust means allowing someone to face the truth with you, even when the truth is uncomfortable, even when you're afraid of what they might say, even when you don't know what happens next.
The truth wasn't the end. It was a choice. For weeks, I thought the hardest thing I would have to face was discovering where my husband had been. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing that the man I trusted had made a decision for me. He decided what I should know. He decided what I could handle. And even though his reason wasn't an affair, the secrecy still hurt. Because trust isn't only about where someone goes. It's about whether they believe you deserve the truth. In the weeks that followed, nothing became simple overnight. There were difficult conversations. There were moments of anger. There were nights when I wondered whether our marriage could survive what had happened. But something unexpected happened too. For the first time, my husband stopped hiding. He told me everything. About the woman from his past, about the daughter he never knew was alive, about the years of regret, about the fear that had controlled his decisions. And slowly, I began to understand the difference between forgiving someone and pretending they never hurt you. I could understand why he lied without saying the lie was acceptable. I could forgive him without forgetting what it cost us. And eventually, I met the daughter whose existence had been hidden from me. She wasn't a secret anymore. She was a person. A daughter who had spent years wondering about the father she never knew. And watching them meet for the first time, I realized something. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive to destroy a family. Sometimes it arrives because a family can no longer live without it. Our marriage was never the same after that night, but perhaps that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because the marriage we had before was built on assumptions. The marriage we rebuilt afterward was built on honesty. And maybe that is the real lesson. Love isn't proven by never making mistakes. It's proven by what we do after the truth comes out. So if there is someone in your life you are afraid to tell the truth to, remember this: a difficult truth may cause pain today, but a hidden truth can quietly destroy trust for years. Because sometimes the truth isn't the end of a relationship. It's the moment when both people finally get the chance to decide what comes next. Have you ever discovered a secret that completely changed the way you saw someone you loved? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe every family has a story worth understanding, subscribe to Tribal Survival Feast, because behind every secret there is a human story, and behind every human story there is a choice.